After the break, Mr. Andrew Eborn, barrister extraordinaire, joins us for a merry romp through this morning's papers. This is Talk TV. Welcome back to Talk Today with me, David Ball. The time 7:27 now on Sunday, October the 22nd. Thank you very much indeed for your company. I'm with Georgie Frost all morning. A great pleasure to have you. Thank you very much indeed. Now, we've been talking about what's going on with Israel, with Gaza, of course, with Hezbollah, with Lebanon, with the role of what's going on in the Middle East, also the implications here, the march in terms of the pro-Palestinian march, or in favour of, as they say, freeing Palestine, chanting that chant, which many people believe means the total obliteration of Israel. I'm asking this morning, how concerned are you for your own safety, and I think the safety of this country, actually? The number 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222 and tweet us at TalkTV, then a space, then hashtag Breakfast Doctors. Got it? Good. Right. Just a few messages before we move on. Good morning, Doctor and Georgie. We can do little about this. This is John in Lincolnshire, one of our regulars. If we cannot ensure the law is upheld in our country, we can't do anything in the Middle East. We have no chance, if we don't do that, of upholding our values. Good morning, David. How can we be effective and force Prime Minister Sunak to scrap EU laws, as he pledged to do during his failed leadership bid last year? The politicians in this country simply failing to implement the largest ever vote in British history, and they think we don't notice. John in Wales, I agree with you totally. Great show, David, says Matthew. I think we're witnessing the reality of multiculturalism as opposed to integration. I was disgusted at our sacred sites such as the Cenotaph and Trafalgar Square being defaced. That's Matthew in Manchester. One more, and I will read it. I'm going to try and paraphrase this, but I'm having quite a few like this. The reason that police don't take action against certain communities is because they are a threat to this country. I'm paraphrasing this. They don't bomb us. Make of that what you will. Keep all of those coming in. Let's look at all of this morning's papers now. I'm delighted to say barrister, a broadcaster extraordinaire, Andrew Eborn, joins us this morning. Good morning.
It is lovely to...
I haven't seen you for ages.
It's been far too long.
Where have you been?
I've been hiding. I've been in Cannes. I've been in Cannes.
So you have. I saw some lovely photos of you.
Glorious. I was presenting the Drama Awards down in Cannes, which
You're
is...
so showbiz.
I love it. It's got to be good. And I'm glad we got the memo, you know. We got little blue going on here. And can I say what an honour it is, not just to join you, but also to join Georgie, who's an award-winning journalist. I love it. And we were talking about awards earlier,
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Hopefully
stuff. Next time you will present it to me.
I would love that. We present it to each other. That's how it works.
I'm not exciting
He's
enough.
smooth, isn't he?
Hey. I know.
He's really smooth.
He can come back, yeah.
Very good.
Right, shall we start by...
do you want to... depressing fear. Yeah. This is what you want to report the news without fear or favour. And as you say, we have to choose our words so carefully. Because
well, that's right. That's why I read that out. And I was quite careful about the way I've read that, because I think it's also important to highlight people's concerns in this country.
No, you're absolutely right. I think this is what happens. And I live just around the corner from the BBC at Regent's Park, and I was there and could see the red paint being splattered all over that. Absolutely. I could see the Palestinians getting ready for their march, because they all tend to gather by the BBC. And the reality is that there's basically, on both sides, there are humans behind these stories.
Good point.
And I think what's happened is the toxicity that you have on social media is now hitting the streets. And I think you're having all these terrible stories. You talked about the tube drivers, which may or may not be a tube driver, and you raised a very interesting point and questioned everything. And I always say that in a war, the first casualty is the truth. And so you need to look at this sort of stuff. And I was amazed. I've been looking at a lot of the fake news which is coming out. And ever since Twitter, X now, and bought, actually almost a year ago, on 27th of October, by Elon Musk.
A year,
amazingly.
Wow.
44 billion. What he did, he got rid of the moderation panel, the council, and it's now moderated with the community.
But don't you feel it's a much nastier place? That's my feeling about Twitter now.
Well, that's what's happened, is everybody's been given these things, and all these terrible stories are still out there. And what's happened is a lot of these stories, they were on the weekend after, it was 2 weeks and a day, basically on the Monday, there were 50 million posts about the war and the conflict, and a lot of those were false. There was computer game footage which was used as opposed to real things.
That's right.
There were reports of children in cages, and that was actually from several years ago. And I've been looking at a lot of these, and whilst some of the pictures which are coming out are horrendous, there's a lot of fake news out there as well. And what I would urge everybody, and it's really sad, as they say, is that people are being polarised. They're sort of turning around, you've got to support either Palestine, you've got to support Israel. The reality is, both sides, there are people at the end of this, and I think that's the real tragic.
Well, I think that's absolutely right, and it is a very complicated issue. We've been talking about it in the office as well. It's made all of the front pages this morning. The Daily Mail, what's the
well, the Daily Mail is saying that Israel, we will strike the head of the snake, talking about Iran, and basically what that is it's the lead story. It's an interview with Israel's Minister of Economy, who basically warns Iran, ayatollahs, they'll be wiped off the face of the earth should Hezbollah attack Israel. And that this is the problem. People are being brought in to this war, and they had something about the Emir of Qatar.
That's right. So we believe he was partly responsible for the release of those hostages.
Well,
we believe.
Absolutely. And I think that I was talking about fake news. One of the stories that they showed basically a clip of him talking about Palestine, and they claimed that he was going to stop the world's oil supply if they didn't stop the bombing. And actually that turned out to be a fake story, because it was actually footage from a conference in 2017, and he didn't say anything of the sort. So my real concern is that this basically blows up everything in that sort of conflict. And I think that's the problem, isn't it?
It's so difficult. As I speak as a journalist, and actually what it really brought home to me last week when we were talking about the hospital bombing, or what happened there, how quick the very trusted news sources. But it is so difficult in this environment where you're not fast, you're old, but you have to.
But we were taught,
everything.
when I was at the BBC, we were taught accuracy over speed.
100%.
Every time. And they didn't do that.
Within an hour of what happened, when we didn't know what happened in Gaza, the New York Times had sent out a push notification to people saying Israel strikes hospital. They changed it an hour later and then an hour after that, just to end up being... This is not acceptable. I understand the need for speed. But the problem is, like you said, it's very hard. And and this is where the verification for things like Twitter, the blue tick, was so vital in the past.
And now you can buy a blue tick. Anybody can buy a blue tick. But you're absolutely right. Denzel Washington said it's not about being accurate now, it's the rush to be first.
I know.
And that's the real thing. And they always say, look, if you read the newspaper, if you don't read the newspaper, you're ill-informed. If you read the newspaper, you're misinformed. And I think that applies now across the media.
Depressing.
Isn't it?
It is. So just the Mail basically is saying this is all basically because Saudi was about to do a deal with Israel. Of course, Iran stands to lose. Iran sponsors Hezbollah in Lebanon. And there is another article in the Telegraph today talking about whether Israel could really actually afford to fight on two fronts. We'll talk about that later. So that's the Mail. Then we've got, what would you like next?
You've also then got, it's basically covering all those sort of two big stories. So it's still not safe enough to evacuate Britons from Gaza, says cleverly.
This is the Sunday Times.
This is in the Sunday Times. And the terror plot to recruit protesters. We were talking about the people on the street, the 100,000 people here in London on the streets yesterday. And apparently what they're saying in the Sunday Express, there's a terror plot to recruit protesters, and undercover agents have been mixing with these pro-Palestinian marchers to seek out dangerous fanatics. And this is the problem.
And in fact, didn't it come from one of the leaders of a mosque who found these people essentially indoctrinating young Muslims and essentially trying to recruit them?
Yeah, and that is the issue, isn't it? Because a lot of people, this is what happens, and this is the poison of social media. It's basically there. When you show pictures of children in cages and you show all this sort of destruction, it's basically to increase the absolute anger in people so that they then become susceptible to these sort of extremist things. And I think the reality is that this needs to be put in perspective. And they always say that trust comes in on foot but leaves on horseback. And if we no longer trust our broadcasters and the media to basically put the right sort of stories in there, this is a real difficulty. What I would urge is that we shine more light and less heat on these sort of issues. And this is what I love coming on this show. It's fantastic because we actually do try to unpack that in in a really sensitive way, because the language that we use, we have to be so careful that we don't want to inflame the situation, but just, as I say, to try and put a bit of calm on it, if we can, put it into perspective and make sure that people are not polarised in this terrible way. London is the best melting pot in the world, if you look at that sort of stuff. Where I live, we have Israel, we have Jews, Golders Green, we have the biggest mosque, I think, in London.
Yes.
We've got everybody there. It's a wonderful melting pot, and it's a great community. My real concern at the moment is you're getting schools, and those reports in the Times this week about 2 Jewish girls' schools which had red paint splattered all over their doors as well. The threats on the street is inexcusable.
Andrew, do you not think, and I think it was Douglas Murray that said, you know, it's conflicts like this that are like a flare in the air. You see where people stand. These, to me, were tensions that have been bubbling up a lot longer than I would suggest. I mean, when did Twitter come around? 2008? Facebook 2006?
Yep.
This is stuff that's been going on for, well, you could argue for millennia. But I actually think that what this has done to me, and I'm quite horrified at it, is highlight just how much sort of anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim sentiment we've got in this country and across the world. That especially in this country, I didn't.
Doesn't this highlight for you the failure of multiculturalism, allowing people to live in their own sinecures? That's my worry.
Yeah.
We need to live together and understand each other's shared values. So, for example, when I was a junior doctor, and I've told this story before, I worked in Ealing Hospital. Well, pretty much all of my patients spoke no English.
Right.
That is a barrier for communication, I think, and understanding, and I think, and tolerance.
And you're right. And what Suella Braverman was saying when she says multiculturalism doesn't work, what she's really meaning, we should be looking at integration, because multiculturalism means your little ghettos or whatever it is on that sort of premise, and people are divided, and we're living in a very divided world. And what happens is that nothing unites people more than the common enemy. And so what you tend to look at is say, look, hang about, this is the enemy, let's try and unite on that sort of basis.
That's very hard to, this sort of integration is very hard to do, because, look, as someone, I've spent a lot of time out of this country, and I like to, when I live abroad, go and live with sort of local people, but actually you don't get that very often. So even Brits will congregate with other Brits,
we're terrible.
South Africans will congregate with others. All these sort of groups, and that's very difficult. What do? Do you go in there and force people to split up? Sorry, we've got too many, French people in this town, you must leave.
You're absolutely right, but what happens is the underlying prejudice that people have does get stirred up, which is your point, isn't it? You sort of turn around and say, hang about, there's this, now all of a sudden we hate anybody who's not in our team.
Also, it depends where you're getting your news from. So if you only learn by peers, if your peers are instilling stuff that is fake, then we go round and round in circles. And what else is on the front pages? I need to take a break.
Well, no, I'll tell you, the other big story is obviously farewell to Bobby, and he was an iconic footballer. He died aged 86, one of the most celebrated players this country has ever seen, and he was one of the very few people who won the European Cup, Champions League and Ballon d'Or. The Times says with his passing, a little piece of England has died. And David Beckham, I went along to his premiere. He invited me.
Nice.
Is there anything you don't go to?
I don't come on your show that often anymore, but apart from that...
Blame Phil, the producer.
we'll come on again. No, but I was there, and he was saying, at that moment, how much he owed to Bobby Charlton, how much... He used to have a poster of him on his wall in his bedroom growing up, and he was basically responsible for getting him into Man United and so on and so forth. And it's very touching. All the tributes, all the pages of the papers, they've got glorious pictures.
Well, it's amazing. It's front page of the Star, the People, the Mirror, the Sun.
Yeah, it's glorious, isn't it? And it's everyone will harp on about football and World Cup. We always talk about 1966. Well, he was the man. Yep. And you work on that sort of premise. But what I love about it, he was an inspirational character. We get lots of our celebrities now that have all sorts of issues and so on and so forth. He was brilliant, and we should absolutely celebrate his glorious life. And 86 is not bad, is it?
No, not at all. Andrew, brilliant as ever. Thank you. Stay where you are, though. And also you, Georgie, stay exactly where you are. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, I think you've got some other rather good stories.
I'll find some other news. I'll find other news. I'll make it up otherwise.
Right, good. Let's not do that, shall we, Andrew? It's time for a break. This is Talk TV. We're broadcasting live from central London. Welcome back to Talk Today into the chaos. Andrew Eborn still chuntering away all through the break. Lots of messages coming in. Louis says, good morning, David and Georgia. Great start to the show. I love Andrew too. Someone does, that's nice.
Well,
the problem is we see this country is that diversity and inclusion has been a failing experiment. Everything has to be done on merit, though. Values, belonging, and most of all, being British. David, what everyone is missing, says Anna. By the way, that was Louise. Anna says, what everyone is missing is the biggest danger. The indigenous population are getting angrier and angrier. Every time we have to tolerate the sight of these marches filmed with screaming women covered in hijabs, it pushes us far further. The UK and the EU will fall to far-right political parties in under 5 years, caused by the failure of government to recognise forced tolerance breeds resentment in this country. Jamie says, this is worrying. It doesn't take much to light the touch paper. We think we live in a safe country, but it doesn't take much to go back to madness. Look at the former Yugoslavia, which was thought of as a safe country. That's Jamie in Ascot. Thank you very much. Keep all of those coming in. I'm asking this morning, how concerned are you for your own safety, also the safety of this country? You know how to get in touch. 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk and your message to 87222 and tweet us at TalkTV. Andrew Eborn still with us, running us through this.
I haven't done a little gallop, isn't it? Well, the other big story is all about Storm Babet. And my concern, the reason I wanted to raise this is because I've seen your own, apart from the social media stuff is going out, your own posts, because your sister was the hero and been...
I mentioned it yesterday. My sister's been amazing. So she went over so basically the fields flooded, came through the house. She then got one of those hoovers that sucks up water, 190 litres out of my carpet. So I'm dreading going back to seeing what the damage is. And of course, and you've got to remember, it's not just water, is it? It's mud.
Yeah. It's everything. Oh, yes.
Everything. And then, of course, you need to make sure it dries or it goes mouldy. And I feel so sorry for people. I'm lucky in that it was only a relatively small flood, but people who've lost everything.
No, and the Times are reporting it, 4 are dead across the UK, and there's floods and travel chaos. So anybody who's been displaced in this way, it is awful. And seeing those pictures, it is really, really horrendous. But I thought we should mention it because of that sort of stuff. But there is a lighter side, and zipping through some of the stories, I always like Newman's Week, because they basically summarise all the different things. You won't be able to see that. Well, you might be able to, but I can read you. There's basically, they've got a picture of the Tories in a cage, sort of saying they face extinction. We're hoping they'll breed with Newman's things, which is rather fun. They've also got a picture here about we've been charged for our car being blown into the ULEZ zone. Is a little mention of the storm. I think no. They've got a picture of a one-man band. I'm not busking. The orchestra here from the English National Opera because of the cuts there.
Oh, very good.
Very good. And the final one from there, Oxford University. This is two speaking over the fence, over there washing. Oxford University. I'm delighted because he's managed to get into prison. There you go. So,
very good.
Glorious. I love that little quick thing. But there are a couple of things. I always talk about AI.
You do.
I do. Thank you very much.
You do
and
like a bit of AI.
I do. Absolutely. It is front and centre. It's 1 year since Elon Musk took over. Now X, on that sort of stuff. And he's been talking about AI and all that sort of stuff, and we're talking about the fake news and everything else. IBM's boss has now come out warning of the dangers of AI.
Not the first to do so.
Not the first to do so, but they're also embracing it. I went to the AI summit here in London, and it's going to be happening in Bletchley Park, the first safety summit on AI, which is going to be superb.
Love to go there.
In a few days' time. I think we should all have a
field trip.
We will love our field trips, don't we? It's all good stuff. But the reality is this, we have to understand what artificial intelligence can do. It can basically replicate anything. The voices, the way that you look, these fake news and so on and so forth. It is really, really powerful. And I say it's our greatest human achievement, but also the biggest potential existential
And this is my concern, particularly in terms of political campaigning, because you can be morphed into saying something you never said.
Oh, 100%. So this is the thing. It's 1 year since X, but we're coming up to 1 year since ChatGPT.
Yes.
And I've just got back from Code Conference, which is basically a tech conference in LA. I know, in LA, darling. Generative AI, is the thing that everybody's talking about.
Absolutely.
There's two forms. The old form, which is, basically data processing, and the new one. And the new one is the one that every business is looking at, having new strategies. They're talking about...
Could you just explain that?
Generative, so one is just data processing.
Right.
The other one is about, so what can generative AI do? It basically is as close as we've got so far to replicating what humans are able to do. So we can, so you're seeing deep fakes, those sorts of things, so they can have your face saying something you never meant to say. But also ChatGPT is where you type in, please tell me Dr. David Ball's show about? And it will come up with a very good, what's the manifesto? But actually the problem with it is it's only working on the biases that we already have in existence. It can scrape places like Google to find information. So, for example, what is net zero? But actually it doesn't take very long for it to start to embed all of the sort of biases that we've already got. So it actually got quite... They did a test on it. They got quite racist very soon. A lot of white supremacists were involved. So actually...
Really?
And this is the problem with AI. If you have a lot of tech bros in America developing this technology, there is an inbuilt bias into it that will impact the way...
Absolutely. And there are two elements to it. It's basically as good as the information you put in. Rubbish in, rubbish out. So it basically scrapes the internet, and there are copyright issues about that sort of stuff because it can replicate everything. And it's also then how it churns it out and how we control that sort of side. So you have the fake Pope in a puffer. You've got all sorts of things, fake news. You can have audio, which is basically sounds like the real person. And that's the most difficult to detect. There are tips and things that you can do to work out when something's fake for an image, so the fingers might look a bit funny or the glasses are not quite right. For audio, it's really, really difficult. And I've been working with somebody called 11 Labs and various other people, and they can now basically do voiceovers in any language using your voice and your intonation almost automatically. So if you have Murray Walker commentating on Formula One, you can have him in every language across the world.
But then, but you and I have talked about this before. Then you have huge problems with intellectual property rights. And do you own your voice?
Well, this is the big thing. It's front and centre. When I was in Cannes, you in LA, me in Cannes. When I was in Cannes, front and centre, the issue was, for both the writers' strike, which has been sorted, and the actors' strike, is they're being replicated by AI. The question is about financing it. So basically, Bruce Willis, who has aphasia, he can no longer act, but he licensed his image to a Russian telecom company for an advert. Tom Hanks used his image in a dental plan campaign, which he didn't authorise. So there's a lot of fake stuff out there.
Oliver Reed in Gladiator when he died halfway through filming, and they continued to use...
And you can do that, and you can de-age people. You have Harrison Ford in that sort of stuff, going back to his 30s while he's still in his 70s. Everything's
something
possible.
For the lawyers, I think.
Well, I was going to say, I think I'm going to leave you to get carried away.
We can sort this stuff.
You can sort it out, but I agree we need to have some sort of control on this, and also we need to educate the public what is real and what is not real, and we're seeing the ramifications of that, I think.
Question everything is what we say.
Question everything. Well done, Andrew.
Thank you. Always see you.
Well done. 11 out of 10. Andrew Eborn there, broadcaster and journalist. Thank you very much indeed.
This is Talk TV.